The old man didn't argue when they told him to leave. He simply nodded, pulled a small notebook from his pocket, and wrote something down. Minutes later, the entire restaurant would wish they had treated him differently, because the quiet note he left behind would change everything. Arthur Bennett stepped inside the restaurant just as the cold evening wind pushed through the glass doors behind him. Outside, the pavement glistened from recent rain. Cars rolled past slowly under glowing streetlights. Inside, the restaurant was warm, lively, and full of conversation. Crystal glasses clinked together. Soft music drifted through the room. At nearly every table, people laughed over expensive plates of food. Many of them paused and take photos before eating. Arthur paused just inside the entrance. He took a moment to look around, quietly observing the room. He looked out of place. His coat was old but neatly kept. The fabric along the sleeves had faded with time. His shoes were polished, though worn from many years of walking. In his hand was a small leather notebook. Arthur stepped toward the front desk. The hostess, a young woman scrolling through reservations on a tablet, looked up. Her professional smile appeared instantly. Then it faltered. Her eyes moved quickly from Arthur's coat to his shoes and back to his face. "Good evening," Arthur said politely. "A table for one, please." The hostess hesitated. She glanced toward the busy dining room behind him. "Do you have a reservation, sir?" she asked. Arthur shook his head. "I'm afraid not. I was just hoping there might be a small table available." The hostess shifted uncomfortably. Behind her, another server noticed the exchange and leaned slightly closer, listening. "Well, we are very busy tonight," the hostess said carefully. Arthur nodded immediately. "I understand." He had already begun turning toward the door when the hostess noticed a small table in the far corner by the window. She sighed softly. "Well, we do have that table for now," she said, "but it might be needed later." Arthur smiled warmly. "That will be perfectly fine." She grabbed a menu and led him through the restaurant. As they walked past the other tables, several diners looked up. Some barely noticed him. Others watched longer than necessary. Arthur followed quietly, moving slowly but with calm dignity. The hostess stopped at the small table in the corner and placed a menu down. "Your server will be with you shortly," she said. "Thank you," Arthur replied kindly. The hostess walked away quickly. Arthur removed his coat and folded it neatly over the back of the chair before sitting down. He opened the menu. The prices were high. Steaks, seafood, imported wines. Arthur studied the menu for a moment before closing it. When the waitress approached, he greeted her with the same gentle smile. "Good evening." "Good evening," she replied, though her tone carried a hint of uncertainty. "What can I get you tonight?" Arthur glanced once more at the menu. "I'll have the vegetable soup, please," he said, "and a glass of water." The waitress blinked. "Just the soup?" "Yes, thank you." She scribbled the order and walked back toward the kitchen. At the service counter, another server leaned closer. "What did he order?" the server whispered. "Soup," the waitress said quietly. "Just soup?" The waitress shrugged. Nearby, the restaurant manager, Rachel Carter, overheard the conversation. Her eyes shifted toward the corner table. Arthur sat quietly with perfect posture, his small notebook now open in front of him. He began writing something slowly, carefully choosing each word. Rachel crossed her arms. "Who seated him?" she asked. "The hostess," the waitress answered. Rachel frowned. "That table is usually reserved for full dining." He asked politely. The waitress said softly. Rachel didn't respond. She continued watching Arthur. Around him, the restaurant buzzed with life. Laughter, music, glasses clinking. But in the corner, Arthur sat alone, quietly writing in his notebook. Rachel straightened her jacket. Then she started walking toward his table. When she reached him, she stopped beside the chair. Arthur looked up calmly. Rachel forced a polite smile. "Excuse me, sir," she said. Her voice carried just enough sharpness that nearby diners began to notice. "There seems to be a small problem." Arthur closed his notebook slowly. He looked at her with patient curiosity. "What kind of problem?" he asked. Rachel glanced briefly at the crowded dining room. Then her eyes returned to him. Her smile faded slightly. "I'm not sure this table is really meant for someone like you." Arthur held Rachel's gaze for a moment. He didn't look offended, just slightly puzzled. "I'm sorry," he said calmly. Rachel kept her voice polite, but the tightness in her smile made the message clear. "This table is typically reserved for guests who are dining with us for a full meal," she said. "And tonight we're extremely busy." Arthur glanced briefly at the menu in front of him. "I did order," he replied. "The soup." Rachel's smile stiffened. "Yes, I'm aware," she said. "But unfortunately we have several reservations waiting, and this table may be needed shortly." Arthur studied her face quietly. Around them, the sound of the restaurant continued. Laughter, clinking glasses, the low hum of conversation. But a few nearby diners had begun to notice the exchange. Arthur spoke gently. "I understand if you need the table later," he said. "I'll finish my soup quickly." Rachel shook her head. "That won't really solve the issue." Her voice lowered slightly. "To be honest, sir, this restaurant isn't really designed for quick, light orders." Arthur remained still for a moment. Then he nodded slowly, as if trying to understand her meaning. "I see," he said softly. Rachel glanced briefly around the room again. Several well-dressed guests sat only a few feet away. Their conversation, slowing as curiosity, pulled their attention toward the corner table. Rachel leaned slightly closer. "There's a diner about 2 blocks from here," she said quietly, much more casual. "I'm sure they'd be happy to serve you." Arthur's eyes drifted down to the small notebook beside his hand, then back to Rachel. "I assure you," he said calmly, "I can pay for the soup." Rachel let out a short breath. That's not really the point. Behind her, the waitress who had taken Arthur's order stood frozen near the service counter, watching nervously. Arthur folded his hands on the table. "Then perhaps you could explain the point to me," he said. Rachel's patience thinned. Her voice rose just enough that the nearby table of diners clearly heard her. "The point," she said firmly, "is that this restaurant maintains a certain atmosphere." Arthur's brow furrowed slightly. Rachel continued, "And sometimes misunderstandings happen." Arthur was quiet for a long moment. Then he slowly pushed his chair back. The movement made several heads turn. He stood up carefully. For a second, the room seemed a little quieter. Arthur reached into his coat pocket and placed a few folded bills on the table. "That should cover the soup," he said gently. The waitress swallowed. "Sir, it hasn't even..." Arthur gave her a small, reassuring smile. "That's quite all right." He picked up his notebook. Then he paused. Rachel crossed her arms, clearly satisfied that the situation was ending. But Arthur didn't move toward the door just yet. Instead, he opened the small notebook again. He flipped to a blank page. Rachel frowned. "What are you doing?" Arthur didn't answer immediately. He simply took a pen from his pocket. The scratching sound of ink on paper was soft, but strangely noticeable in the moment. A few nearby diners leaned slightly closer. Curious, Arthur wrote slowly, carefully. When he finished, he tore the page from the notebook. He placed it neatly on the table beside the untouched menu. Then he closed the notebook and slipped it back into his pocket. Arthur looked at Rachel one last time. His expression held no anger, only quiet politeness. "I hope your evening goes well," he said. Then he turned and walked calmly toward the exit. The glass doors opened. Cold air swept briefly into the restaurant, and then he was gone. For a moment, Rachel stood there without moving. She glanced at the table, at the folded cash, and at the small piece of paper Arthur had left behind. Rachel scoffed lightly. "Probably a complaint," she muttered. She turned and walked away. Across the room, the waitress slowly approached the empty table. Her eyes settled on the note. She hesitated. Then she picked it up and unfolded it. The moment she read the first line, her face drained of color. "Rachel," she whispered. Rachel didn't look up from the register. "What is it now?" The waitress walked toward her slowly, the paper trembling slightly in her hand. "You need to see this." Rachel barely glanced up from the register. "What is it now?" she asked impatiently. The waitress stood beside her, still holding the piece of paper Arthur had left behind. "You should read this," she said quietly. Rachel sighed. "If it's a complaint, just put it with the others. I'll deal with it later." It's not a complaint. Something in the waitress's voice made Rachel pause. She held out her hand. Fine, let me see it. The waitress handed over the note. Rachel unfolded it casually, clearly expecting some irritated message about poor service. But as her eyes scanned the first line, her expression shifted. Her confident posture stiffened. The note contained only a short message, written in careful handwriting. Kindness is the ingredient every great restaurant needs most. Rachel frowned slightly. Is this supposed to be inspirational? She muttered. Then she noticed the name written beneath the sentence. Arthur Bennett. Rachel scoffed under her breath. People sign fake names all the time. But the waitress didn't respond. She simply pointed to the second line written under the name. Rachel leaned closer. Her eyes read the words slowly. Founder, Bennett Culinary Foundation. Rachel blinked. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she laughed softly. Okay, that's actually kind of funny, she said. Guy gets asked to leave and suddenly he's pretending to be a famous investor. The waitress didn't laugh. Neither did the server standing nearby, who had been listening. You should look him up, the server said quietly. Rachel rolled her eyes. Please. Still, she pulled out her phone. A few quick taps later, the search results appeared. Rachel's thumb stopped moving. The first image that appeared on the screen showed an older man standing beside a group of chefs at a large culinary event. Gray hair, calm expression, kind eyes. Rachel's stomach tightened. It was the same man. She quickly tapped the article beneath the photo. The headline read, Arthur Bennett expands Culinary Foundation grant program for independent restaurants. Rachel's throat felt dry. The article continued. The Bennett Culinary Foundation had funded dozens of restaurant expansions across the country, millions of dollars in grants. Arthur Bennett personally approved the final selections. The waitress leaned closer. Is that him? Rachel didn't answer. Her eyes had moved to another part of the article. One sentence caught her attention immediately. Arthur Bennett is known for visiting restaurants anonymously before making final investment decisions. Rachel's chest felt suddenly tight. She looked up slowly. Across the dining room, the table where Arthur had been sitting was already cleared. The folded cash was gone. The soup had never even been served. Rachel's mind raced. No, she whispered. The waitress swallowed. You said he ordered soup? Yes. And he sat here for almost 10 minutes before you went over. Rachel's grip tightened around her phone. Another server stepped closer. Rachel, didn't the owner apply for some grant a few months ago? Rachel's eyes widened. She turned back to the article and scrolled quickly. The list of cities receiving potential funding appeared. And there it was. Their city, their program. Rachel's heartbeat began to pound in her ears. Wait, she said quickly. That doesn't mean anything yet. But the waitress was already shaking her head slowly. You told him to leave. Rachel looked back toward the front doors. The cold glass reflected the street outside. Arthur Bennett was nowhere in sight. Rachel grabbed the note again and stared at the signature. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Oh no. The server beside her spoke carefully. If that really was Arthur Bennett. Rachel didn't let him finish. She turned abruptly toward the office hallway. Call the owner, she said. The waitress blinked. Now, Rachel snapped. But what should I tell him? Rachel looked down at the note one more time. Her voice was barely audible. Tell him, she said slowly, that the man who decides whether this restaurant receives its expansion grant, she swallowed hard, just walked out her door. And suddenly the entire restaurant felt much quieter. For several seconds, no one moved. The clatter of dishes from the kitchen continued, but out in the dining room, the energy had shifted. Conversations felt quieter. Staff members stood closer together than usual. The waitress still held the edge of the counter. Rachel, what do we do? She asked. Rachel didn't answer immediately. Her eyes were locked on the restaurant doors, as if Arthur Bennett might suddenly walk back through them. But the street outside remained empty. Finally, Rachel turned toward the office hallway. Call Mr. Delgado, she said. The waitress grabbed the restaurant phone and dialed with trembling fingers. Rachel paced near the counter, her heels tapping sharply against the floor. A moment later, the waitress spoke quietly into the phone. "Mr. Delgado, you should come in. Right now." Rachel stopped pacing. The dining room felt tense now, even though most customers had no idea what was happening behind the scenes. The waitress hung up slowly. "He's on his way." Rachel rubbed her temples. "This can't be real," she muttered. One of the servers spoke up. "Rachel, if that really was Arthur Bennett." "I know who he is," Rachel snapped. The server went silent. Rachel grabbed her phone again and searched more articles about the Bennett Culinary Foundation. Every headline made her stomach sink deeper. Multi-million-dollar restaurant grants, national culinary investment programs, expansion funding for independent restaurants. Then she opened her email. Her breath caught. 6 months earlier, the restaurant owner had forwarded an application confirmation. Subject line: Bennett Culinary Foundation Expansion Grant. Rachel remembered the excitement that day. Mr. Delgado had been hopeful. The grant would allow them to renovate the kitchen, expand seating, and open a second location. Rachel had even joked about celebrating if they got selected. Now the memory made her feel sick. The front door opened suddenly. Cold air swept into the restaurant again. A tall man in his late 50s hurried inside, removing his coat as he approached the counter. "Rachel," he said sharply, "what's going on?" Mr. Delgado rarely came in during dinner hours. His expression already carried concern. Rachel handed him the note without speaking. He read the sentence once, then again, then he saw the name. His eyes lifted slowly. "Where is he?" asked. Rachel swallowed. "He left." Mr. Delgado stared at her. "Left?" Rachel nodded. "I asked him to give up the table." The silence that followed was heavy. Mr. Delgado looked around the restaurant as if expecting someone to jump out and tell him this was a joke. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said. Rachel explained quickly. Arthur arriving, ordering soup, sitting at the corner table, her conversation with him. The moment he stood up and left. The entire time, Mr. Delgado's face grew darker. When she finished, he walked slowly toward the corner table where Arthur had been sitting. The table was spotless now. The candle flickered softly beside an empty chair. Mr. Delgado placed both hands on the back of the chair. "Do you know how Arthur Bennett chooses his investments?" he asked quietly. Rachel didn't answer. "He visits restaurants anonymously," Mr. Delgado continued. "He watches how the staff treat people." Rachel felt her stomach drop again. Mr. Delgado turned to face her. "You didn't ask him to leave because we were full." Rachel opened her mouth, but no words came. "You asked him to leave because you thought he didn't belong here," Mr. Delgado said. Rachel looked down. Mr. Delgado held up the note again. "He wasn't judging our food tonight," he said slowly. "He was judging our character." Rachel felt every employee in the room watching her. Then Mr. Delgado pulled out his phone. "What are you doing?" Rachel asked nervously. He didn't look up. "I'm checking something." His fingers moved quickly across the screen. Then he stopped. His face went pale. Rachel stepped closer. "What is it?" Mr. Delgado turned the phone toward her. It was the Bennett Culinary Foundation website. At the top of the page was a message posted only minutes earlier. Arthur Bennett is currently conducting final evaluations for this year's expansion grant recipients. Rachel's heart pounded. Mr. Delgado slowly lowered the phone. "The final decisions are being made this week," he said. Rachel felt her throat tighten. "But maybe he hasn't made a decision yet," she said quickly. Mr. Delgado looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and urgency. "Then we need to find him," he said. Rachel blinked. "Find him?" Mr. Delgado grabbed his coat again. "If Arthur Bennett makes his decision based on tonight," he looked around the restaurant once more. "This place could lose everything." Then he turned toward the door. "Rachel," he said firmly, "you're coming with me." Rachel barely had time to grab her coat before Mr. Delgado was already pushing through the restaurant doors. Cold night air rushed against them as they stepped onto the sidewalk. "Where are we even going?" Rachel asked, struggling to keep up. Mr. Delgado pulled out his phone while walking quickly toward his car. "Arthur Bennett travels with foundation staff when he's doing evaluations," he said. They usually book rooms at the same hotel. Rachel's stomach twisted. And you know which one? I hope so. He opened the car door and slid behind the wheel. Rachel climbed in beside him, her hands trembling slightly. The engine started, and the car pulled away from the curb. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Streetlights flashed across the windshield as they drove through the quiet city streets. Rachel stared out the window, replaying the scene in her mind. Arthur sitting quietly, his calm voice, the way he had simply stood up and left without arguing. She swallowed. I didn't know who he was, she said quietly. Mr. Delgado kept his eyes on the road. That's exactly the problem. Rachel looked down at her hands. You judge him by how he looked, he continued. Rachel didn't respond. The car slowed as they pulled into the entrance of a large downtown hotel. Mr. Delgado parked quickly. Come on. Inside the lobby, warm lights glowed over polished marble floors. A few guests sat quietly in armchairs, speaking softly or scrolling on their phones. Rachel scanned the room nervously. What if he's not here? Mr. Delgado walked straight to the front desk. Excuse me, he said politely to the receptionist. We're looking for a guest, Arthur Bennett. The receptionist's expression changed immediately. Oh, she said. Yes, Mr. Bennett is staying with us. Rachel's heart jumped. Is he still here? Mr. Delgado asked. The receptionist nodded. He's in the lobby lounge. She gestured toward a quiet seating area near the tall windows. Rachel turned slowly, and there he was. Arthur Bennett sat alone in a leather chair, reading something on a tablet. A small cup of tea rested on the table beside him. He looked exactly the same as he had in the restaurant. Calm, unbothered. Rachel felt a wave of nervousness wash over her. Mr. Delgado walked forward first. Mr. Bennett? He said carefully. Arthur looked up. Recognition flickered in his eyes. Ah, he said gently. Good evening. Rachel felt her chest tighten. Mr. Delgado cleared his throat. My name is Carlos Delgado. I own the restaurant you visited tonight. Arthur closed his tablet and placed it on the table. Yes, he said calmly. I remember. Rachel stepped forward slowly. Mr. Bennett, I'm Rachel, the manager. Arthur studied her face for a moment. His expression wasn't angry. If anything, it seemed thoughtful. Rachel forced herself to speak. I owe you an apology, she said. What happened tonight should never have happened. Arthur listened quietly. I made assumptions about you, Rachel continued, and I was wrong. The words felt heavy as she said them. Arthur nodded slightly. That is often how these situations begin. Rachel felt a sting of shame. Mr. Delgado leaned forward slightly. Mr. Bennett, our restaurant applied for your foundation's expansion grant earlier this year. Arthur folded his hands together. Yes, he said. I'm aware. Rachel held her breath. Mr. Delgado continued carefully. If tonight gave you the wrong impression of our business, I hope you'll allow us a chance to explain. Arthur looked from Mr. Delgado to Rachel. Then he picked up the small notebook from the table beside him. The same notebook. Rachel's stomach tightened. Arthur opened it slowly. I visit many restaurants each year, he said calmly, and I rarely introduce myself. He turned a page. I prefer to observe. Rachel swallowed hard. Arthur continued. I don't evaluate the food first. He looked directly at Rachel. I evaluate something far more important. Rachel's voice was barely audible. What is that? Arthur closed the notebook. Character. Silence filled the lounge. Rachel felt the weight of that word settle over her. Mr. Delgado spoke carefully. Mr. Bennett, has a decision already been made? Arthur looked at them both. His expression remained calm. Yes, he said. Rachel's heart stopped for a moment. Arthur reached for the notebook again. The decision was made tonight. Arthur Bennett closed the notebook and looked around the hotel lobby, calm but commanding. You've all seen what happened tonight, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the room. And you've all formed opinions about who deserves respect and who does not. Rachel swallowed, her hands trembling slightly. Mr. Delgado shifted beside her, glancing nervously at the other staff who had followed them from the restaurant. Arthur's gaze settled on Rachel. You assumed I didn't belong there, he said softly, yet every word fell heavy. Because of my age, my clothes, my appearance, you judged before you observed, and that judgment carries consequences. Rachel's throat tightened. I didn't know who you were, she whispered. Arthur shook his head. That is exactly the point. You didn't see the person. You only saw what you wanted to see. He flipped the notebook open, revealing the note he had left at the restaurant. This note, he said, was not a complaint. It was an observation. And that observation now comes with a public decision. Rachel's eyes widened. Decision? Yes. Arthur turned to Mr. Delgado and pressed the phone into his hands. Show them. Mr. Delgado hesitated, then tapped quickly. A live stream feed opened on the phone. The camera panned across the restaurant where they had been working. Staff and a few diners were watching on social media. Arthur continued. Tonight, this restaurant demonstrated poor judgment and a lack of respect for human dignity. That behavior is unacceptable for any establishment hoping to receive the Bennett Culinary Foundation support. A murmur ran through the hotel lobby. Rachel felt heat rising in her face. Arthur raised his hand slightly. Rachel Carter, as the manager, you were responsible for the atmosphere. Your decision to ask me to leave was witnessed and judged, not only by me, but by the world now watching. Rachel tried to speak, but her voice faltered. I made a mistake. I'll fix it. Arthur shook his head. No, this is not about fixing mistakes. It's about accountability. He turned to the camera. The restaurant will not receive our expansion grant. Leadership that cannot respect others does not deserve growth, no matter the size of its kitchen or the beauty of its decor. Gasps echoed around the room. The social media feed was exploding with comments. Unbelievable! That's powerful. Finally, someone held him accountable. Rachel sank into a chair, the weight of the humiliation pressing on her chest. She had thought she could judge without consequence. Now the judgment had become public, undeniable, and irreversible. Arthur's voice softened slightly. But this is also an opportunity. Respect, kindness, and integrity can be learned. This restaurant may have a future, but only if it chooses to rebuild on a foundation of decency and human dignity. He looked at Rachel, who was avoiding his gaze. You will participate in retraining programs, volunteer outreach, and community service. You will learn to treat every guest with respect, regardless of appearance, age, or background. Only then will the restaurant be reconsidered. Rachel's lips trembled. I understand. Arthur nodded once. Good. Growth is possible, but accountability comes first. He turned to Mr. Delgado. And you, as the owner, must ensure this change is embraced. The public will remember this lesson. Your staff will remember it. And anyone who visits your establishment from now on will be treated with dignity. Rachel finally looked up. Her eyes met Arthur's, and she whispered almost to herself, I see it now. I see what I failed to see before. Arthur smiled faintly. That is the most important thing anyone can learn. Success without compassion is meaningless. Power without empathy is hollow. Remember that tonight. He closed the notebook one final time, placed it neatly on the table, and stepped toward the door. Before leaving, he glanced back at Rachel and the staff. Now, he said softly but firmly, you have the most important ingredient in your hands. Rachel's voice shook as she repeated the words, almost like a vow. Kindness. The camera panned one last time across the staff, the empty corner table, and the soft glow of the restaurant beyond the hotel windows. Outside, the city hummed with life, but inside, a lesson had been carved into memory, a lesson about respect, integrity, and the power of quiet courage. Arthur stepped through the doors, leaving a silence that carried both awe and reflection. The moral was clear. Dignity cannot be bought, and character cannot be ignored. And for the restaurant, nothing would ever be the same. If this story touched your heart, like and subscribe for more powerful stories of courage, justice, and unexpected reversals. And don't forget, comment where you're watching from. Your support helps keep these stories coming.